Okay, students, just try to know the difference between Lord Alfred Tennyson and Robert Browning. Okay, and this kind of question is also asked in the examination. Make a comparison between Tennyson and Browning. Why such question always come in the exams? Because they both belong to the same period, same age. We can say that they were contemporary poets. Tennyson also belonged to the Victorian period and Browning also belonged to the Victorian period, means they both belong to the same period. In spite of that, they both had been poets and they both got name and fame. They both gave us the best poems in the history of English literature, it is supposed to be. And we cannot say that whether Tennyson got much more fame or his poems were better than of Robert Browning. We cannot say so because they both were equal in literary composition, in name and fame, Browning and Tennyson. But in spite of that, why does it happen that we are asked to make a comparison, we are asked to make a difference between both poets in spite of belonging to the same period? So in short, I am going to describe, I am going to explain the difference between both. If any of you has gone any composition of either Tennyson or Browning, you can find it very well. For example, I just give you another example of Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy, he was also a Victorian writer, and Robert Browning was also a Victorian writer. But in spite of that, we find Matthew Arnold, okay, a Victorian poet. There had been so many Victorian different writers, but in spite of that, we always find, going through their composition, their writings, we find that they all had been very different in their philosophy, in their thoughts, in their composition, in their literary works. So why does it happen? Why does it always happen that the period was same, Victorian age, and the composition, the poems, the idea, the philosophy, the thoughts are coming very differently from the different kinds of writer. So why does it happen? That don't forget that the age of Victorian age was the age of both, was the age of science, was the age of religion. So this was the reason that this age, we can say that this was the best age, this was the worst age, because this was the age of science and this was also the age of religion. So in this way we can say this was the age of doubt whether we must believe, we must have faith in God, or we must go to science. So the people, most of the writer, they always remained in doubt to whom follow, which path they should go on. So now here, don't wasting your time, just try to make a comparison between Lord Alfred Tennyson and Robert Browning. Tennyson was a poet of only his age. Okay, if we go through the composition of Tennyson, we can find all the characteristics, all the features of Victorian era. So we can say that Tennyson was a poet of only his age that was Victorian age. On the contrary, Robert Browning, he can be called, he can be known properly if you go through all the composition, all the poems of Robert Browning, that he was not of a particular age, Victorian age, but he was supposed to be the poet of all ages. So this was the main difference, first of all, that Tennyson was a poet of only his age, while Browning was supposed to be the poet, a poet of all ages. Tennyson was, no doubt, Tennyson was conventional, conservative, orthodox, and of course he was also a nationalist. When we say that he was conventional, conservative, orthodox, then I just remind a few lines of Tennyson when he wrote in The Princes. Okay, that was the poem of Lord Alfred Tennyson, The Princes. And for the first time when I went through those lines, I also felt that Tennyson, he was highly influenced, highly his age, no doubt his age cast an indelible impression on him. So no doubt he was conventional, he was conservative, For example, the lines are men for the field. According to Tennyson, there is too much difference between man and a woman, and their works are also divided. Means what he has told us very well in his poem The Princess, that what is the work for man and what is the work for woman, decided by God, decided by supreme power. Also they are very different in their work. So that idea explains very well, tells us very well that how much conservative, how much conventional, how much orthodox Tennyson had been in his era. And those four lines are: men for the field and woman for the hearth. Okay, it was said by Tennyson that man for the field, man is made for the field. On the contrary, woman is made for the hearth. Woman is made for the hearth means she is only made for the kitchen. When Tennyson, such a poet, such a great poet, says that man is for the field and woman is only for the hearth, hearth that is fire, okay, fire that is kitchen. She is made only to work in the kitchen. That was said by Tennyson, that was written by Lord Alfred Tennyson. Man for the sword and for the needle she. Sword seems very beautiful in the hands of man. On the contrary, in the hands of a woman there must be only the needle. Means a woman, she looks very pretty working embroidery work. So according to Tennyson, man for the sword, okay, man for the weapon, and for the embroidery work, for the household work, for the needle she. Man with the head and woman with the heart. Okay, that was said. If you can understand, that was said by Lord Alfred Tennyson, that man is with the head, man is with the intellectuality, and woman with the heart. Woman with the heart means she is full of emotions, full of emotion. A woman always works using her heart. On the contrary, man always uses his head, his wisdom, or his reason. So man with the head and woman with the heart. Okay, these are the lines of Tennyson. And the last one that was very, very striking, and this is why I could never forget that how much conservative Tennyson had been when he said, man to command and woman to obey. Man has been created by God only to give order, right? Man's duty is to give orders to woman, and the main duty of a woman is to obey the commands of man. So that was the thinking of Lord Alfred Tennyson, and this is why that he had been very conventional, right? Man for the field and woman for the hearth, man for the sword and for the needle she, man with the head and woman with the heart, man to command and woman to obey. So on the other hand, we find that Browning, he was not conventional, conservative, orthodox, and he had been very original. He was very courageous poet. And these kinds of thoughts we can find in his writing also. He had been very bold. He was, no doubt, he was a revolutionary. He was a cosmopolitan, and Robert Browning had been more universal, more permanent in comparison of Tennyson. So Tennyson, because that was the impact of his age, it was the age of doubt, and this is why but it was also the age of Robert Browning. It was not with him. Tennyson was a poet of doubts, okay, he was a poet of conflicts, and he has no clear idea, no clear philosophy, no clear, that is the theory of man, nature and God, being spiritually doubtful. So why what was the reason that Tennyson had been so spiritually doubtful? That he was a man of doubt, he was a poet of doubts and conflicts because of the age. He couldn't decide whether there is the existence of God or not, there is an existence of God in the nature or not. He could never believe, he always doubted whether nature behaves, nature works just like a kindful or merciful mother. So he always doubted this in the existence of God. Being spiritually doubtful, he always preached a compromise because he was doubtful. So in the end he found that there must be a compromise between science and religion. And he always believed in both. He believed in science and he also believed in religion, but just not like Robert Browning, because he had a personality of doubts. So he had no obvious philosophy of life, right? When we say philosophy of life, we find this kind of very deep, very profound philosophy of life in the composition, in the poems of Robert Browning, right? So now focus on this line, that Tennyson had no clear philosophy of life, no profound philosophy of life to follow. On the other hand, Robert Browning, okay, belonging to the same period, he never carried a doubtful personality, a doubtful idea. He was very sure God is in the heaven. He was so optimistic because he was not doubtful. He always believed in the existence of God. He also regarded that God lives in nature. And just like William Wordsworth, he also worshipped nature because he always believed in the existence of that supreme power. And this is why that he was a poet of spiritual faith. Okay, God is in the heaven and all is right with the world. That was the philosophy of Robert Browning, that if there is God in the heaven, why should we be afraid of? Okay, for what we must be afraid of? So Browning was a poet of spiritual faith, and he peacefully, because he was not doubtful, he always believed in the existence of God. And those person who regard that there is a power, there is a supreme power, there is an existence of that supreme power, those kind of people always live very peacefully. They always get mentally peace. And the same happened with Robert Browning, because he was very sure that there is God. And if there is God, that we should not be afraid of anyone, of anything. That was the philosophy of Robert Browning. So Robert Browning was a poet of spiritual faith, and you can go through Rabbi Ben Ezra. Rabbi Ben Ezra is completely based on his this kind of spiritual faith. He also believed in rebirth, he believed in soul, he believed in that is redemption, reincarnation, heaven, hell. He believed in all these kinds of philosophy. And this is why that Robert Browning, he lived very peacefully, because his belief was very firm in the existence of God, man and nature. He thought that if man wants to find out God, then he must take the help of nature, because nature, man and God, they all are concerned very deeply with one another. He had a very clear idea of philosophy of life that was not with Lord Alfred Tennyson. Now another thing is that Tennyson, he was extrovert while Browning was introvert. Introvert means that he focused on his inner self. He always peeped within himself. He always tried to find his inner thoughts and presented that. He was interested in his own thoughts, in his own feelings. Okay, when there is one person who is extrovert, that's mean that the person is related or is interested in the thoughts of others, in the feelings of others. But when one is introvert, this means that he is interested in his own thoughts, inner feelings and inner, this means that you are somewhere, you are concerned with your soul, with yourself, with your God. So the biggest difference between both had been Tennyson was extrovert and Browning was introvert. Tennyson was interested in others' thoughts, in others' feelings, but Browning was interested in his self thoughts or self feelings. Browning was thoughtful and he was a philosopher. Tennyson was not interested in his own thoughts and this is why that he ignored his own thoughts. If Tennyson had focused on his own thoughts, perhaps he could have given us a very new, a very different kind of philosophy. And Tennyson always preferred only to be a poet. He was not a philosopher, he was only a poet, and his poetic genius was lyrical. Browning was dramatic. Tennyson was an idealist, and he saw only nature's beauty and believed in pure, permissible love. On the other hand, Browning was a realist. He had a variety of even love, spiritual and physical. Okay, he presented both kind of love, platonic love and physical love. Tennyson couldn't give to his age faith in God. That was we can say that that is the biggest difference between both, that Tennyson couldn't give to his age, Victorian age, faith in God, because he always carried a doubt in the existence of God and in humanity. Browning brought a message, because Browning had been the most optimist, the most hopeful poet of his age. And today also, this is why that we can say that Tennyson was a poet of only his age, but Browning was a poet of all ages, because all the hopes, optimism, bright side, bright thoughts always come from the composition of Robert Browning when he says God is in the heaven, all is right with the world. And when he says, welcome each rebuff, they come to teach you. Okay, we should not be afraid of difficulties, of problems. So such kinds of thoughts, such kind of philosophy is given by Robert Browning, and this is why that he brought a message of hope and optimism. We can say that just like a balm, Browning's poems are like a balm of consolation. Okay, balm of consolation. There is a hope, there is an optimism, and there is a consolation in the poems of Robert Browning. And he brought a balm of consolation for a faithless and pessimistic humanity. In the Victorian era, there was doubts, there was pessimism in the minds and hearts of people, and Tennyson couldn't give to them that faith in God, but Browning gave that hope, that consolation to the people. So this was the biggest difference between Tennyson and Robert Browning, and in detail you can write very well what is the difference between Tennyson and Browning.